My God, look at this dog. You're a hell of a partner, Maggie. You're not being very helpful right now. Anyway, thanks for coming back. So we're going to get into the master airflow end of this tune. Something I thought I'd touch in while the idea is fresh in my head is that basically how the engine fuels, how the ECM fuels the engine is it's all just math. I mean, it knows what stoichiometric ratio you want to run, what fuel mixture. So if it knows exactly how much air volume, it knows how much fuel to add, and that's really what this all relates to. Is it's looking at the master airflow sensor to tell it exactly what volume of air is moving through, and since it knows what the volume is and the RPM is, how many cylinders there are. It knows how much air each cylinder is getting. And how much air each cylinder can process really depends on its particular efficiency at any point in time. And as you can see, we cam this motor, so it's really not coming on to real good efficiency until 3,600, 4,000 RPM, and then it starts to really load up. And the cylinder efficiency comes way up. And a lot of that is determined by, it's all the mechanical parameters of the engine. It's how efficient the cam is at low RPM. This cam has a little bit of duration, so it's pushed up in the scale. It's not making a whole lot of power down low. Different changes in the air intake tract, in the exhaust, the way that performs and where it flows at different RPMs. Cylinder head flow rates, per cylinder, intake runner performance, and how well you can move air through the cylinder head. And that's essentially what the numbers in the VE table represent, our efficiency at any point in time. Depending on engine vacuum, and as we go down in vacuum under load, and engine RPM, you can see the efficiency change depending on the mechanical specifications of the engine and how much duration is in the cam, how much the valves open, how well the cylinder heads flow, intake restrictions, exhaust restrictions or not, that kind of stuff. And so that's what those numbers represent to the ECM. The ECM knows exactly how big the cylinder is because we plug that in. So it knows it displaces a certain volume of air for every stroke. And it takes a look at the efficiency and it tells you, well, the cylinder should displace this amount of air, but it's only 80% effective here. So it's really so it'll multiply that cylinder displacement by the efficiency, and it tells it how much air it's actually able to process and adjust the fuel accordingly. So that's what we're doing, is changing the efficiency in this table to tell the computer how efficient each cylinder is at any given point in load and RPM. All right, back to the master airflow tune. Let's get this sucker loaded up, get this tune plugged in and take it out on the road, see what it does. Good morning, YouTube. All right, so the new tune number 10 is loaded in, and that's got the trims turned back on, and all the idle DAPs are back and active. It's going to go into closed loop when it warms up. It's all set to go. As you can see, I've got a ton of histograms, a ton of charts loaded up that I'm going to be using to cross-reference and check. I'm looking at dynamic air for the base idle airflow. I'm going to be confirming the VE and MAF EQs are good and clean. I've also got a corrected IAC and some other stuff going on. Some of these will get killed off. The EQ based ones I'll pull off, and of course the wideband, I'll pull the widebands down the bottom there. I think it's off the screen. There's quite a few down off the screen that are just reference, ECM voltage, stuff that in case I have an issue I can troubleshoot with. Looking back at the run, I still have that data collected. But some of these we're going to pull off once we go through this run, because this is partly just confirming the VE table and the MAF calibration are okay, and then starting to look at the base settings. And since it's ice cold, or as cold as it's going to get right now, when I start it, I'm going to use this. I have this set up for trims, short and long-term fuel trim versus temp. Will tell me whether it's running rich or lean at temp as it warms up for each temperature range, and I can use that to adjust the engine coolant temp EQ modifier. And then of course, once it warms up, gets up to operating temperature, I'm going to be tracking and looking at the dynamic air and see whether it's whether my baseline airflow is set correctly and all that. I have that one in there? Yeah, I've got idle air there. Sorry, idle air has a idle airflow. And then we'll be using the short-term and long-term adapts, the idle airflow adapts, to make sure the base idle airflow is set properly. And so some of these will get killed off. What else do we do? That's about it. I'm going to start her up and let it sit and warm up for a bit, and then we'll get it out on the road and see what it feels like. See if I have any drivability issues. Take it up to operating temperature. You get a decent log on the warm up. And I'll come back when I'm all done with this run and we can talk about what happened. So here's what happened, and it's definitely an important lesson to be learned from this. So this is the log from that run I went out on that morning, where I had just turned the trims back on and closed loop back on. And I now have down this side, where are we? You'll see the trims are listed in my channels. And I didn't have those on the VE tuning and the mass airflow tuning runs because I'm trying to economize and make sure I'm not using more bandwidth than I need to with the communication cable. Because every channel you run, has data streaming across into VCM Scanner software to track all those channels, and you can only carry so much data through these cables. So what was happening in the past is I have had VCM Scanner lock up in the middle of a tuning run or in the middle of a log, and it was a pain in the butt. So I got in the habit of deleting off channels I didn't need to try and economize and keep my bandwidth down. So during the VE and the mass airflow tuning runs, I had the short and long-term trim channels erased or deleted off of there because I had the trims turned off. I didn't need them. So the problem with that is that when you disable long-term and short-term trims in the tune and go out and start the car, the ECM is not going to trim, your fueling based on long and short-term trims, which is fine. Long-term trims has a table held inside the ECM where it saves the last cell, the data for all the cells in a long-term trim table. And a long-term trim table looks just like the VE table. It's the same kind of cell breakout, but it saves the long-term data for each cell based on what it read when it was there last, and hence it's called long-term trim. So even though you disable long-term and short-term trims in the tune and closed loop, it's still going to reference the last values that are saved in that table unless you manually go in and reset them. And I did not do that. I didn't realize I didn't do it because I wasn't tracking the short-term and long-term trims, so they never populated up here, they never populated down here, and I never saw those values because I had turned these channels off. So what happens is, and of course I have the EQ turned off because I'm trying to save the bandwidth from my wideband because that uses a ton of bandwidth. So I'm going out on that test run, and when I start looking, now that I'm looking at trims to see whether the fueling is right, trims are way off. I mean like 15, 20%, 24%. And just getting worse as it goes up in RPM. So I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I go back, and I activated. I went back into a subsequent run, and I turned EQ back on, or turned my wideband back on, and I turned the trims back off in the tune, like I was going to do a VE tune. And with the trims turned off in the tune, but the trim channels still listed. Even with the trim turned off, I was still showing long-term fuel trims being used to adjust fueling. So you got to make sure you not only turn off the long-term and short-term trims and close loop in the tune when you're doing a VE or mass airflow tune, but when before you start the log, as you start the vehicle up, getting ready to go take a log, you need to go up to controls and special functions and turn off, reset the long-term fuel trim table. So what I had to do was go back to square one, and it only took me a couple of more VE runs. I turned those off, I reset the LTFT table, and I turned off the trims, and I went back and ran a couple of more VE runs, and then I went in and do a couple of more mass airflow runs. And where's one of the later ones? And as you can see now, trims are zeroed out because there are no trims. You can confirm that because I'm actually tracking those down here. So I still have them to confirming that there's no trims, no long-term trims affecting anything. And my VE and the mass airflow table are coming in. And this was in the middle of it, so it got tuned a bit from here. But you'll see in the next video is going to pick up from that. So I just want to touch base. So that's definitely something you want to know. And when you go back in, so when you're doing the VE tune and the mass airflow tune, and you're hooked up to the wideband, you're not using trims to tune the mixture and tune VE and mass airflow calibration. Before you start that log, make sure you reset to LTFT, and you only have to do that once. Once you reactivate the trims, then it's going to store new data into the long-term fuel trim table. All of these cells will populate. But if you want to go back in and turn the trims off and go just off the wideband, you need to go in when you hook up Scanner up to special functions and vehicle controls and reset the long-term fuel trim table. Because even though those trims are turned off in the tune, whatever's saved in that table will still affect your fueling. And so it cost me a couple of hours of pulling my hair out and a couple of extra runs, but there it is. All right, YouTube, good morning. So I just came back from the third MAF run. These actually all done the same day. I switched it over to run off MAF from 100 hertz up in dynamic air, and obviously unfailed it, and go out with the same kind of EQ error histogram running for mass airflow EQ error, and that pulls up a single bar, and we looked at this in the last video, I think. So as you can see, we're getting really close. -1, -3%, needs an extra 1%. 2, 3s, 3, 4. Could probably use a touch up there. Up high, it starts to get a little fat because I hadn't made many pulls up. So I was, each successive mass airflow pull, I was running a little deeper into RPM. So this run, I ran up to about 6K, which is getting close to red line, close enough to be able to interpolate the last couple of cells and not worry about it. And as you can see, above 7750 hertz on the mass airflow, we were getting really rich. We were up 6, 7, 9% in that cell, and we ran up to almost 10,000. So that'll be fine. This is good. And remember, reminder again, you're going to be running short and long-term trims, so they're more than capable of compensating for 1 or 2% or 3% of variation. So I'm not overly worried about that. But the process is the same for the VE table. So we'll just take this, right-click, copy, go over to editor, find my file, MAF Tune 3. Then we're going to go engine, airflow versus freak for MAF calibration. Select the whole band and paste special, multiply by half because we don't want to pull the whole thing out. Because again, you're always going to have variations depending on what's going on with engine temp, intake air temp, humidity. There's always going to be slight variations. So don't worry about trying to get it down to 1% variance. You never will. I mean, you can get it perfect on one run and make the same run the next day, and it's going to be off by 2%. So don't sweat it. So we'll multiply by half. Well, actually, I'm going to blow this up first so we can see on the line chart what it does to it. Paste special half. And there you can see it dropping it more up here. And obviously we have a little smoothing we need to do here. What cell was that at? That's at 9875. So yeah, that's just passed. We logged all these cells, but this is where it fell off. So we're gonna grab these guys. And I'm gonna grab from, because if I look along this line, if you follow this with your eyeball, this is darn straight. So I'm gonna interpolate from that last cell up to about here, which should be about just over 10,000. And I'll interpolate this guy. We'll see what it looks like. Yeah, that looks perfect. A little bit of a dip down here, nothing terribly significant. No big spikes, that's exactly what you want. And then I'm gonna go through and I think I'll run one smooth. Oh, and one thing I want to double check, and I did notice before when I was looking at this, is that we had one cell that didn't populate at all. This mouse is not cooperating. And where were we? I think it was 7,500. So I just want to make sure that 7,500 isn't a standout as far as being way too high, way too low, as long as it's in line. So 7,500, we didn't capture enough counts to trigger. It's funny, all of those cell counts, and it just jumps right over 7,500. Where are we? Back here. So there's 7,500 is a bit low, but honestly it's in line with the others. So we're going to, when we smooth this, these will both come up a little bit. And we bring these down. So I'm going to smooth between, yeah, I'll smooth between. I don't want to, because I don't want to lose this lip, because that's where the mass airflow sensor maxes out. So it'll ramp up steadily. I'm probably never going to move enough air to hit up here with a 4-inch intake. I'll move in enough volume. We'll go from like 10.5, and we'll smooth this down to 55. Sorry, this mouse is being a little sketchy here. So 10.5 to 55, and then we're going to smooth it. We'll take some of that hump out there. Yeah, so that's good. And again, you know, you're only talking about, you know, 2 or 3%. You know, variance between these guys. If this is, you know, 2% low and this is 2% high, that, you know, your trims are going to compensate for those. So I'm not worried about it. That's a nice looking graph. So I think we're done with MAF. I'm going to go ahead and save this so I don't lose it. And you'll see the last tune I wrote was MAF 3, which is one we just logged. And I always try and match my log to my tune names. That way it's easy to coordinate what changes had what effects. And of course we'll make that MAF 4 and save it, which is probably going to be the last MAF run. I think it will, because we're darn close. We're within a 1.5, the whole 1.5, 2 points the whole way out until we got to the very top end, and we took a bunch more off of that. Where did we go? Yeah, I wonder if I should have unsmoothed that guy. So we were way high. Remember, we did a half percentage. So, you know, this is rich by 2.74. It's only going to take out 1.37, which will leave us 1.37 still rich, which is okay. I'm not worried about that. But these were pretty fat up here, you know, 6, 7, 8%, which means it's going to take out, you know, 3, 3.5, 4, and still leave a 3, 3.5, 4 rich. So I may go through and pull another. Let's see, like if we're 8% rich right here, it's only going to take out 4 if I do the 0.5% apply. So that still leaves us 4% rich. So I'm going to take another 2% out. From 77.50 up, because I think the last log I ran up to 76.25, and that's why this is clean here, and then it pops up. I don't think 77.50 was touched. So I'm going to go back in, and I undo that smoothing still. Yeah, undo the smoothing. And that was, of course, I forgot already because I'm old and I'm doing too many things at once, 77.50 and up. So from 77.50 up to we get close to our max. Stop jumping. I hate when this does this. We're going to take another 2% out of that. 0.98. Yeah, you can see that kind of lowered the whole range down. And we'll smooth this one a little bit. See if we can get a smoother transition. There's that top punk. That's nice. And then we're going to go back and do the same smoothing from, say, 6250 up to like 82. And we'll smooth that, get some more of this, see if we can get these little peaks and dips out of here. Yep. All right, looking good. So that's good. I want to get another couple of percent on top because I still would have ended up about 4% rich up top, and I'd rather bring that down so at the most I'm 1 or 2% rich, and that way I'm not depending too hard on the trims. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and save that. I don't think we had any knock retard. No. Knock retard's looking good. And there's our couple of big pulls. Up to $6,000. And so we got no retard, so I can definitely start bringing the timing up once I get this back trimming and work on the idle settings. And where's my mouse? All right, so we'll close up that. We're going to go back into dynamic, and we'll change this back to 4K. So that means this goes back to basically the factory setting. So it's got to run off VE up to 4,000 RPM, and then it'll start mixing in filtered mass airflow. So that brings that back up. Now we're going to go back and turn the trims back on. Close the enable. And here you can see the temperatures where it would go into closed loop. I just went back to my old file that had those numbers in it, and you can update those. So closed loop is back. Now it's going to run into closed loop. Long-term trims were 155. Now we just need short-term trims to be re-enabled in open loop. Deceleration fuel cutoff will come back in. That was at 104. So since we're running the MAF run, the MAF cal run, we only had the trims and the DFCO turned off, and I don't need the COT turned back on because I don't run CADs. Power enrichment is set where I had, and I actually have gone back in and tweaked power enrichment because I realized as I was tuning that I wasn't getting into power enrichment, and I wanted to know why. And of course I figured out that the factory tune, this 115 relates to my stoic. But power enrichment was only coming in at 90% throttle. So that's the way it was from the factory. You had to get 90% to the pedal before you started getting to power enrichment. So I brought this down and graded it. So at low RPM, anything above 50% is going to bring it into power enrichment. And then anything above 45, 40, 35, 30. So as you're backing out of the throttle at high RPM, it's still giving you a little bit extra fuel until you're down below 30% or you're down below the map enable value, which is 75 kPa. So anything above 75 kPa and that throttle position is going to go into power enrichment. And then it's just a flat 1.25 or 1.275 across. And that's it. So trims are back on, closed loops back enabled. It's going to go back to filtered MAF and run dynamic here from 4K up the way it should. So when we go back and load this tune and start it up, we're going to be back on with the trims running, and we'll be able to start working on some of the idle tune. What else did I want to talk about? That's it for now. I'll catch you next time. Like and subscribe.